Hi everyone. So this is a video continuing on with our exploration of the news elements and what makes for a good news article or just any kind of article in a student newspaper. So if you look into textbooks and readings, they'll describe all of these different topics that kind of you can use to determine what would count as news. These are just four examples. What I want to do today is not necessarily go through what these examples mean, but show you what they look like in actual student newspaper articles. And the idea is sometimes people just use these topics to come up with an article idea. I find that it's often better to not just use the topics themselves, but use the examples. So what I mean by that is this. You can talk about impact a lot. So impact means, you know, does the topic that you're thinking of writing a news article affect a lot of people in your community, the community that's the audience of your paper? If it does, it's probably newsworthy. So in a school setting, for example, a policy that one teacher implements in one class will affect a bunch of students, but it's not necessarily news. It's something that that class might have to deal with on their own. If it becomes kind of a department-wide process or policy that's affecting lots of people, that has bigger impact. That might be news. So here's some examples of that, in our school newspaper. So here's an example of when just last year, the Department of Education cut funding to a key program at our school that affects every single student. So this is an example of impact. This decision has big impact. Here's an example of similar topic. It was involving the pandemic and remote learning, and because of certain procedures for reopening the school, that might affect our course availability. So this is courses might be cut. That's going to affect every student at the school. So you can see through both of these articles that the impact angle, how many people is it going to affect? Is that effect going to be serious and long term or meaningful, impactful? That's news then based on kind of the idea of impact. Oddity is not necessarily like, something weird. It just might be something that's out of the norm. It might be something weird, but there's a lot of weird and odd and out of the norm things. So what makes something news if it's odd or offbeat or abnormal? Here's to me a good example. So here's this senior who kind of had this viral video go live after graduation. So he posted this, I guess, on TikTok or something. And whereas a lot of seniors post things like that, this one, had 200,000 views pretty quickly after graduation. So that doesn't happen every graduation, and students were noticing it. So this is a good kind of, this isn't as impactful as this article, right? Courses might be cut, but it's definitely news, and it's definitely something that people are going to find interest in. This is another good example. So this teacher has kind of this funny hall pass policy, and he always carries it around his neck, and he's known for it. And so these students decided to do a feature on the hall pass itself and interview the teacher. And this was one of our most read articles of the year. So it's a little bit of an odd topic, but because it's something that people recognize and know and kind of enjoy, it was worth giving this attention to. So that became a good news article. If you go to prominence here, that doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as impact. So something that's impactful, is going to be prominent, right, in your face kind of thing. But prominence means more like who's involved. So if if a student breaks a rule, that's kind of a serious school rule, that's probably not news, right? So the student is one student who is going to graduate and kind of leave the school, and students break rules. That's kind of the thing. If a principal breaks a major rule, that is a different story because the principal is far more prominent, far more influential, and that's bigger news. Now, it's not always bad things happening, right? So here's two very good things that are about prominence. This is meet alumni who are these insta-famous food bloggers. And this is one of our most read articles. So it's kind of these two alums who got married to each other, have a food blog on Instagram that is pretty popular and prominent in the area. And so they interviewed them and talked to their teachers and talked about their time at our school and what led them to both, you know, meet and get married, but also have this kind of family blog. So these people are prominent because they have this kind of stature by way of their Instagram page. At one point, this NBC show, here's this NBC actor was filming around our school. So, you know, there might be student groups filming some project at school that's not prominent, right? We don't have to have an article, student groups filming project at school. NBC filming major television show at school is more prominent. So this is worthy of news. Conflict isn't always like, you know, big like are people fighting and getting in each other's faces and hating each other. Like, I mean, there could be something like that happening, but conflict is frequently like, is there going to be a winner or a loser in a competition? So we have this, you know, senior freshman, senior sophomore freshman junior competition, and here's the winner of that competition. So it's showing you conflict and showing you a winner. And that's where you might find legitimate news stories. Now, again, if it's a conflict between, you know, two people had I don't know, staring contest at lunch, 1-1, that's not necessarily news. But two won a major competition at the school, that's news. So there's overlap between topics like this, but what I'm more interested in you seeing is when you look at the actual examples from other student newspapers, you see that, you know, these really are real. They really can start to show you what makes for good articles, and they're probably better at inspiring you to come up with things. So you could think what is impactful and try and come up with an idea based on just the concept of impact. But I think it's easier to come up with an idea based on specific articles. So as you're becoming a student journalist and looking for article ideas, use not just these specific examples I gave you here, but other ones from your school or other student newspapers. So citing budget crisis, budget cut, you know, happens. There's not always a budget crisis, but there are always budgetary decisions every single year. So that article about impact can lead you to ask questions of your school. What budgetary decisions led to the biggest changes this year? Who made those decisions? Why? What do others think about them? That's going to lead to a story about something of impact. The alumni food bloggers. Now, not every school is going to have insta-famous alumni food bloggers, but what you see there is two things. Alumni who have had kind of prominent roles after leaving the school. Most schools have a few alumni who have, you know, kind of positions of prominence. They're worthy of a feature. But then also these two had met at our school and gotten married and have a family now. So that story of, you know, kind of high school sweethearts, romance is always going to lead to interesting, you know, stories worth telling. So can you ask that same thing about your school, or at least your current year? Are stories like that out there that you haven't covered yet? So there's this idea out there, I think, that the news is obvious. Like, you know, the news is news because everyone knows about it. And so it needs to be reported on because it's this big thing that's obviously happening. And sometimes it is, right? So when there's a presidential election, like, it's not like, oh, breaking news, surprise, there's a new president. Everyone knows that that's coming. But a lot of stories aren't just about what everyone knows already has happened. They're about, you know, things that people might not realize are that significant, and they need you to kind of root it out and present it and show its significance. So somebody might have quickly seen this viral video in the school community, but didn't necessarily realize how viral it got. And so when you write an article on it, it draws attention to it and gives you an interesting perspective that the person who just saw the video quickly didn't necessarily see. Somebody might have known that there is this budget thing happening, but this is really getting in depth into it and showing you the big impact that it's going to have. Somebody might hear that there's filming that happens around your school. That happens a lot in New York City. So hearing about filming versus, here's the actor showing us the script, talking about the show, that's much more interesting. So you want to train yourself to, not just think that the news is going to be something that you're like, oh, this is happening, so I have to write about it, but rather something that you're seeking out. And that means both learning when to kind of stop when you hear something that sounds important but isn't necessarily breaking news, big story, we got to write about this, but important enough that maybe you need to ask some questions and look more closely about it. Or not even something that you've heard about, but something that you can expect. So if budgets are passed every year, then every year a budget article is probably going to be viable, something that you can pursue, because every budget every year is probably going to impact the community in some way. So again, don't just use these articles to come up with new articles. Look at other articles. There's lots of examples, both from our newspaper and from newspapers around the country. And the more that you see the news elements actually in action, the more inspiration you'll get.